Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to beautiful downtown Fresno. Here we are.
I heard a laugh over there. That's insensitive to Madera, Fresno.
Oh, okay. Or other residents who I see in the audience. Yeah, sorry there, Mr. Dougherty. It is 29th of May. This is the Road Charge Technical Advisory Committee meeting. It's 9:01, and we're going to get started. I'll ask Ann Johnson to call the roll.
Senator Jim Bell. David Finnegan.
Present.
Stephen Finnegan.
Here.
David Chu. Chair Jim Medapper.
Present. All right, well, we have a quorum, and thank you all for being here. I know Lee Tiem is here. I saw him earlier this morning at breakfast, so I know we'll see him shortly. And I would like to formally welcome you all to the May meeting of the Road Charge Technical Advisory Committee. We have a very full agenda today. There's a lot on it. The policy topics that we're going to be looking at today relate to vehicle types, participants, and our continued discussion on privacy provisions that we would include in any design recommendations for the California Road Charge Pilot Program. And in our housekeeping department, for members of the public that are here, one of the main purposes of this meeting, and the reason we're jumping around the state, is to gather public comment on the issues that we're discussing. So if there's anything that anybody wants to speak on, please don't hesitate to fill out a blue card and hold up the blue cards. Ann is right up there. We would like to have your name and contact information just so we know who has spoken to us. And I'm periodically going to ask members from the audience if there's anything that you'd like to speak on. Don't hesitate to come up to the podium right over there to ask questions, provide feedback. It's very important to us. And also to our TAC committee members, if there's anything that comes up that warrants more discussion for items that we don't have time for on the agenda today, we'll put those, as we call, in our parking lot, and we'll come back for discussion in the future. So with that, also want to welcome to the table is Susan Branson, the Deputy Executive Director of the CTC, Will Kempton, the Executive Director of the CTC, and Norma Ortega, Chief Financial Officer for Caltrans. And also in the audience is Malcolm Dougherty, the Director of Caltrans for the state of California. So welcome, and thank you all for being here. So what we'll do is we'll go to item 2 on our agenda, which is the approval of the April 24th meeting minutes. They are in our packet for your review, and unless there are any questions or comments to it, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the April 24th meeting.
I'll move approval.
All right, we have a motion from Finnegan and a second from, was it Hans? Okay, got him. All right. Couldn't tell if it was Ishwar or you. Yeah, that's right. Any discussion on the minutes? I'll just comment. I thought the minutes getting better and better, and it was a very good review of the many things that we've done. And looking at these, I just have to say how impressed I've been with this task force in plowing through some very heavy-duty issues and simplifying them as much as possible. And I thought the minutes did a good job reflecting that from our meeting in April in Monterey. With no other comments, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, our minutes are approved. We'll go to the next item on the agenda, which are TAC member reports. And I really want to highlight, and this is an important piece, and I've received communications from several folks regarding member reports. And I think it's important to highlight that since our April meeting, we've received email correspondence from a number of individuals, letters from organizations, including the Taxpayers Association, the California Building Industry Association, the Self-Help Coalition. Also, Professor Marty Wax had sent me an email about this, and we've also gotten other input from folks. And so what I want to do is go through some of these things and highlight this communication and actually have a brief discussion on it. And then also, I know that Gary Gutierrez from Caltrans is here in the audience, and when we chatted the other day, he also has follow-up to some things that were raised at our last meeting, and I thought we would address those in item 3. Again, I think it's so important to Professor Marty Wax's comment to me the other day by email that we not only take in this communication, but we don't just note and file it, we discuss it and we respond to it. So I want to first start, before we get into the letters, to just see if there's ever any TAC member communication on things that have taken place in the last month since we met in Monterey that you'd like to comment on.
Thank you. At the recent legislation conference for the California State Association of Counties, we had a couple of panels that dealt with transportation. Director Kempton sat in a panel with Senator Frazier and Senator Bell. And one of the topics, of course, that popped up was this TAC committee. And then when we had our breakout sessions with some of the committees, I would want to recognize Kiana Buss from CSAC that runs the transportation committee. We actually had a brief presentation on this TAC and what's taking place here and how it is available for people to comment, and was very well received. And we're going to do a follow-up as we go through, but a very in-depth one at our annual meeting, and perhaps we'll schedule some sort of a presentation from this group there.
That'd be great. Thank you, Supervisor. Any other comments? I'll kind of provide a synopsis. I know maybe Will Kempton might as well. Norma Ortega and I were at the Fresno Bee editorial board on Wednesday of this week. There was, I thought, a very good article in the Fresno Bee that kind of encompassed what our work is here to date. They may come out with an editorial either in support or opposed to what we're working on at some point. We don't know that. In Portland, I attended the International Bridge and Toll Association conference, as did a number of people from around the country on this road charge concept. Gave a presentation there. Lots of ideas exchanged. Also, I spoke at the Imperial Valley Economic Summit on the road charge, spoke at the AGC's annual conference. Also met with legislators, members of the Board of Equalization, and others, and in the governor's office as well, on updates with some of the items that we've been discussing and where the task force is. I will share with you all the legislature, the governor is watching closely what this task force is doing. I think they're encouraged from what they've seen so far, but of course, as they always say, the devil's in the details, and we have a long ways to go until we get to that report. Mr. Kempton, did you want to review anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Microphone.
I think we had a pretty successful month since the last time we met with respect to the kinds of outreach activities that Supervisor Finnegan talked about. I spent a lot of time going around, literally around the state, talking about our funding situation in California, the condition of our roads, the needs that we have, and we always get into a discussion about the road charge and talking about the work of the TAC and encouraging feedback and engagement in this process. As part of that, the Transportation Commission has planned 7 public forums around the state of California. And we held our first forum for this year, and these will all be completed by the end of the calendar year. We held our first forum on Wednesday here in Fresno. I thought I saw Mr. Marcantonio there, but he tells me he was not there. So I thought I saw him in the audience. But in any event, it was following the meeting that Norma Ortega and Chair Madaffer had with the editorial board at the Fresno Bee. And we had an agenda. We had co-hosted this event with the local business community, as well as the regional transportation planning agencies from the Central Valley, and they participated in a panel presentation. We allowed people to come in for a half an hour and look at some of the project work that's being planned, and had assistance from Caltrans in terms of talking about project work that's coming up. Then we had an opportunity to explain the current situation to the audience and hear not only from the transportation geeks in the room, but also from the business community as well as the local transportation agencies. And then we opened it up for questions, and we had probably about a 45-minute dialogue back and forth with a lot of participation from the members of the public who were in attendance, including a representative from the Fresno Farm Bureau, and the typical kinds of questions. But here's my key point, Mr. Chairman. In the press coverage that we received and in the course of that dialogue we had at the public forum, it was a reasoned discussion. Did people have concerns about a road charge? You bet. They had a lot of concerns, but we were talking and engaging in a productive discourse, which I think is sort of the hallmark of what's been going on here. And I believe the Technical Advisory Committee and your efforts going around the state and all of the efforts that are undertaken through this body are helpful in that regard. And so I look forward to continuing as we go through the year and continued TAC meetings as well as our public forums to try to inform, educate, and gather feedback.
Any questions or comments? Let's then talk. Oh, I'm sorry. I need to. Richard.
Well, I don't know if this mic's working, but two things. One is that we've reached out through the... wonderful. Two things. We've reached out, Carrie has been helping us to set up outreach discussions with the 14 low-income community coalitions groups around the state that the California Endowment funds as part of their Building Healthy Communities program. So we're hoping that we'll have an initial discussion, I think, in July. Carrie, is that... Anyway, we'll make sure that that happens and go forward with that. The other thing I wanted to put on our radar, we've already put some stakes in the ground in terms of initial ideas about the different protocols we want to test. And through discussions, one thing that's becoming particularly clear to me is that for low-income households, the time permit is probably going to be the most attractive option. And so there's two things about that. One is that, and these two things I'm hoping that our consultants can bring us back some thinking on at the appropriate time. So one is that many people who, in the course of my work, I talk to transit-dependent households about their experience with transportation, and many of them own cars. But the problem is that they don't have the resources to repair the car, to get it insured, whatever, all the time, so that much of the time that car is actually not in service. So the first point is that I think that the time permit, we need to have an option that tests a kind of a hybrid, so that if in the course of 6 months you pay your money, but you don't drive up to a certain number of miles, then you get an additional odometer option. And then the second thing I want to mention, and this is hinted at in a letter we got from Transform, I was able to get some data, California data on vehicle miles traveled by income, 0 to 10,000, 10 to 20, et cetera. And it confirms that low-income households drive a lot less than more affluent households, per household and per vehicle. And so there was some mention early on that the time permit might have to be priced a little bit on the high end in order to discourage people from driving more. Well, I think whether it's in the context of today's exemption discussion or in how we design the time permit, we need to think about having a special income or means-tested time permit that accounts for the fact that those vehicles drive less.
Professor?
Do the data also address the fuel efficiency of the vehicles or the age of the vehicles? Because remember that a shift, if there is one eventually, to mileage-based travel would benefit those who are driving fuel-inefficient vehicles. And if the low-income population is disproportionately in fuel-inefficient vehicles, that should be taken into consideration as well. So if the data are available, that would be interesting too.
I've been told that those data are not readily available. But I agree we need to have those data. I'm not sure I draw the same conclusion from that.
I think that is something that we should definitely ask to look in. In fact, in the briefing book, there's a great chart on page 78 that shows if you get a car that gets 15 miles of the gallon, you are paying a lot more by the mile today than you are if you're getting 55 miles of the gallon, you're paying 0.6 cents. If you're getting 15 miles of the gallon, you're paying 2 cents per mile driven. And that does, I think, something that should be studied when it comes to socioeconomic issues, and I think the Transform letter addressed that.
Is there that low-income people are
Microphone.
driving fuel-inefficient vehicles just to explore what the relationship?
Understood.
I don't know.
Generate a few comments on this, Lauren.
You know, this may be, since this is kind of a generic discussion period, this may not be the right time to have the discussion, but I would like to follow up. I could do this privately, but I think it'd be good to have a more thorough public discussion of the suggestion that that low-income drivers would prefer or benefit from a time permit, because I'd like to know more about where that's coming from, and then how that, very sympathetic to what you're saying. I'm just trying to see how, but it's not all intuitive to me, so I don't know if that's something that we need to schedule time on, or if it's part of the agenda, or if it's just something I should deal with.
I see it touched on the edges today, and I do think as we move forward, based on what's in the briefing book, some we've touched on it a little bit already, but clearly moving forward, excellent point, and we need to look at that.
Add one sentence to that, Ron. I think it's something we need to test.
Yeah.
And I think there's a reason for hypothesizing that will be worth testing.
Let's go through just a couple of the letters. Again, this is to Professor Marty Wax's comments. We want to make sure that we aren't just noting and fine. Oh, I'm sorry, Lee, I didn't see you.
I just have one quick point, which is
Thank
that if we want to, if we're trying to promote socioeconomic equity in this, it's also possible that there could be a mechanism like a subsidy or a sort of a means kind of a limit, so that it doesn't necessarily have to actually affect the operational aspects of whatever permit system we use. Wouldn't require exceptions that are just sort of like, gee, if you make under X, then you don't have to get one, or something like that.
Okay, those are all valid issues. Well, to that note, the Transform folks sent a letter. They had some outstanding questions and comments, really throwing them in more into the research area, comparing data on current costs by socioeconomic quintile of the various road charge scenarios, studying the potential economic impacts of various methods of fee collection. Some of the things that Richard's pointing out here, perhaps exempting the first number of miles of travel, exempting households earning a certain income level, which Lee was just referencing. Those are all issues that, again, I just want to make for the record that letter should be referred to the consultants and staff for further review, follow-up, because I think, again, one of the things, as I stated early on, is every little bit of communication we get on this, the public input is so very important to make sure we design a program that makes sense. California Building Industry Associations.
Before you leave that, okay, I'm just seeing this letter, and I don't know who they are. Who's Transform California?
I don't know who they are either, but...
I know who they are.
Okay.
Transform is
They look pretty good.
Is an Oakland-based and with an office in Sacramento, transportation, smart growth, transit-focused advocacy group.
Thank you.
Okay. California Building Industry Association, some of the things that we're talking about today, what vehicles are included. They talk about vehicle stock, what are the mileage exemptions going to be. specifically to private roads. And I think a lot of this stuff that I see, these letters, if they had the benefit of these briefing books that we get, we've already addressed a lot of this stuff, or we're going to be talking about it today. So again, it's good to see these kind of comments coming in. Caltax sent a letter in, talking about who is a taxpayer. What are, gas tax and road charge have aggressive impacts, imposing a greater burden on low-income taxpayers. How should this be addressed? Privacy issues, elements of utility metering and billing systems. They pointed out some very good things that, again, the consultants are aware of, but I think it's important, and for the purposes of public disclosure, that we talk about it. Self-Help Counties Coalition, they wrote a letter in opposition to the zero-emission vehicle exemption. Apparently, there's been a rumor going around that somehow or another we made a decision to exempt zero-emission vehicles. I hadn't heard that. I got also a letter from Suzanne Smith, the executive director of the Sonoma County Transportation Authority, also concerned about excluding EVs. I'd never heard it. I mean, I'm an EV driver for 2 years, and one of the reasons I was interested in this is to make sure I was included, because I think we should be paying our fair share. So, again, these are things that the task force can talk about. Let me call on Gary Gutierrez. Yeah, Steve?
Just a real quick question. You commented that maybe there would be value in others seeing these briefing books. Are these briefing materials available? They're all online, so anybody, any organization who is interested can access this information.
And a great web address of CaliforniaRoadChargePilot.com will take you right to the transportation. Oh, Vince Mamano. Everybody, we have to recognize Vince. Please stand up. He is the California Division Administrator for the Federal Highway Administration. Vince, thank you for being here.
And just to let you know, we do provide the working group, the Technical Advisory Working Group, the full packet of information that you get at the same time, and we do go over it with them. So they are fully briefed on what the TAC is talking about.
Yeah, and it is good to see Vince here. This way the federal government maybe can learn how to do it right. And so we appreciate you being here. Yeah, there you go. Let me call on Gary Gutierrez. If everybody was presented a follow-up Q&A, and this gets to Marty's points, there were some excellent questions raised at the meeting in Monterey. So Gary, walk us through some of those, again, with the idea of keeping everybody informed.
Might be my electric little emblem here. Yes, as a matter of fact, what we would like to do from starting in April and moving forward is as questions are encountered during a technical advisory committee meeting, and we feel as though we are not able to provide a satisfactory answer at that point, we are recording those questions and going back, reviewing, and coming in and basically providing a better answer, a more sufficient answer that we would believe that the committee members would be satisfied with. So what we've done today is we've gone through the video feed, and we reviewed all the questions, and so we're presenting here at agenda item 3 a number of questions and answers that we gathered from the meeting in April. A couple of things that I'd like to point out along with this agenda item is there was one question about submitting a matrix, if you will, to help better define privacy issues as it relates to each of the various options. And you'll notice that we've also included that privacy matrix. Also part of this is we are also including updated FAQs. We've taken the time to update those accordingly. Are there any particular questions that anybody would like me to emphasize?
Did everybody get a chance to see the handout that referenced the questions and answers from the last meeting?
I just had one question. This was provided to us today, or was it
a few days ago?
Our intent is to provide them when it goes out with the presentation materials, which is typically a week. I believe it's a week before. 2 weeks before.
I may not have gotten an email or something. That I don't think I got the briefing book. I don't think I got this package.
This is the first time that we're doing this, so, we're trying to align it so that you receive it early on, but I felt that it was important for us to come back and communicate with you some of the issues that we weren't able to address appropriately at the prior meeting. So you will be seeing this as a standing item every month if there's questions that came up at the TAC meetings that we need to address.
Does everybody have a copy of that? If not, we'll get some printed off and make sure that members of the, they're on the website, but for the purposes of this meeting. It's basically, it's a couple-page document that talks everything. Some of the questions, is it possible to generate rankings for the privacy performance? How's enforcement being considered? Have other road charging pilots tested real transactions? These are questions that came up at the last meeting, and there's answers in here for those. And again, as Norman was just addressing, we just want to make sure. If people ask questions, I want to make sure we're answering them.
Absolutely.
And that's what this is all about. Okay. Thank you very much, Gary.
Thank you.
Also, one last thing. You all would have received yesterday a copy of a letter from the California State Transportation Agency notifying the committee of the administration's request that is part of the May revise to the California budget to accelerate completion of the pilot program by approximately 1 year. Now, that doesn't affect the meeting schedule that we have through the end of this year, but perhaps, Norma, you might want to address that. A copy of the letter is in the packets, and maybe Norma can give us a brief overview of the request and how it relates to the Technical Advisory Committee.
I think I may have mentioned earlier in the process that the governor had expressed an interest in trying to expedite the work done on the pilot project. And we were kind of tasked with coming up with whether it was viable and what kind of schedule we might adhere to. The current timeline that we had laid out for the pilot was about 42 months, and it contained 4 phases. The Technical Advisory Committee, public engagement, and policy direction work, which you're undertaking right now, is a 12-month process, and we have not changed that. There are 3 other phases: procurement, setup, testing, and evaluation criteria. The 3rd phase was the actual live demo, and then the 4th phase was the demonstration, evaluation, and report writing, for a total of 42 months. Our proposal is to accelerate it to 31 months, and as Chair Madaffer mentioned, we are not taking any of that time from the Technical Advisory Committee because this work is absolutely critical in the design of the pilot. What we've shortened and we've overlapped some of the activities is the procurement and setup and testing. The pilot demonstration project is shortened to 7 months, and then the demonstration, evaluation, and report writing is shortened to 4 months. So our aim is to try and complete the work by July 2017. Last Friday, we were at the Senate Budget Committee. We have received funding to fund the project through the 4 phases, and they did consider the accelerated schedule as well, so that was approved as well from the legislature's budget perspective.
Eric?
Are we kind of shortchanging ourselves on expediting the process and the testing? I mean, this is a huge, we're talking California, and we're talking millions of vehicles, and we may be talking about a class of vehicles that hasn't been involved in other VMT-type pilots. I'm just a little concerned that by condensing it, we want to make sure that we're doing it right. And so whatever we prop up and recommend, that's going to have our due diligence stamp on it. I just want to make sure that the state is, using and utilizing as much time as possible to make sure that we're getting this thing right.
I would agree with you. I think, Norma, the big concern that I had, I'm not so worried about back of the house stuff. That's your problem. I am more worried, though, and would like to know if we were to lengthen the time of the pilot. Right now, the pilot's a little shorter than I would like. What can you guys accommodate?
I think we might be able to go to 9 months. And I think that would give us some good information. We're
at
obviously...
7 now? Is that the number?
Right now, we're proposing 7, and I think we can do 9.
The original was 12. Yeah, the legislation said 12, but I think the real crunch is in the back of the House, correct?
Correct.
Which is fine with me. I mean, this isn't... is everybody okay if we were to... Eric, would that be satisfactory? I know it's not 12, but better than 7.
Well, I just, if this committee votes to include a certain class of vehicles, there's going to be different segments of that industry that are going to have to be tested that haven't probably been tested before or demoed before. So I just want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence on this whole pilot program. And so if 9 months is what the will is going to be for that, then I guess that's it. But I just wanted to express my concerns.
And I really appreciate that. Mr. Finnegan?
Sure. I think this touches on an issue that I was going to bring up later as well. And I think for the consultants here and for Caltrans staff and others, I think as we are making certain decisions, and obviously the timing is a decision, not exclusive of ours, obviously, but of others, but also include the number of vehicles, types of vehicles that will be included, and other complexities. I mean, I think we want to study as much as possible, but I think I'd like to get feedback from staff and consultants to find out if we're bumping up against reality in what can be done with the amount of money that's available and the amount of time that's available. So keep that in mind as we go forward. What we don't want to do is set up an ideal vision of a pilot and then not be able to really deliver on the information that's needed to come from that.
Yeah, I mean, that is the key thing. I would suggest you guys try to do the 9 months then, I don't want to shortchange it any more than that. I'd prefer 12, but 9 will probably give us, but being sensitive to Eric's comments, especially with the trucking industry, if they end up becoming included in this, depending on where we go, I will tell you personally, if that is the case, that's going to be huge for the public, because I think the public, as you well know, they see trucking as a user of the road much more than they see others. So that it would be important that that data get collected and we give it the most time possible.
Yeah, we'll certainly go back and take a look at that if there's changes today. We did feel that this new schedule was doable. I think we can certainly do 9 months, but we certainly will consider.
And Laura, I just also want to say I'm appreciative of the fact that the governor's office and the legislature that's tracking this closely is looking to accelerate this, because clearly for everything that we've seen, the gas tax continues to do this, and we need to find a new funding source. And it's either charging by the mile or you're going to start paying more on a registration or what have you. So the fact that they're interested in this process just gives you all in this task force the idea that this is being very closely looked at as a replacement to a failed funding source for transportation. Lauren?
What happens in July of 2017?
The report on the pilot will be issued to the legislature, to the governor. There will be a lot of deliberations. There's going to be certainly a number of policy questions that the legislature...
In other words, the end of the study is July 2017. There's no new fee or policy adopted for the state on July 2017.
Correct.
That still requires the legislature and the governor. Okay,
Correct.
So my point, sort of going on with Jim, is that if you want to have, this isn't our decision, of course, it's the administration and the legislature, but from my perspective, if you want to maintain the interest of this administration in following up what they started, then you got to give them some time to do it. And if you let this thing dribble into 2018, the administration is going to be dealt out of it. So I just think that's a really I'm very sympathetic to the heavy vehicle issue, because that's a matter of first impression, but I think the politics of this are pretty compelling as well.
Yeah, and I have to agree with Lauren 100% on that. I don't think there's, ladies and gentlemen, for the first time in 30 years in this state, they're actually talking about funding transportation. in a substantial way. And I think all we have to do is drive our roads and see that that is 30 years overdue. So it is good to see, and I'm very sympathetic to Lauren's point that politically the stars are perhaps coming into alignment to find a new and equitable way to fund transportation in our state. So appreciate those comments. All right, anything else on item 3?
I just wanted to toss, I'm sort of a pessimist and a worst-case analyst person, and my concern is that, I'm not actually sure what from the folks who are actually going to do this work, what the most sort of time-sensitive part of it is, whether it's the actual length of the pilot or whether it's procurement or anything else. Mistakes often happen, and my concern is that when the schedule gets really accelerated and mistakes are being made or they're perceived, and then you realize, but then you are backed into a corner and you cannot do anything about it. And so yes, you get a report at the appointed time, but it doesn't actually help you any. And the other side of it is, I know the governor wants this. I know the politics is favorable, but politics also takes crazy time. And I would think they would be pretty stupid to push a report to be done earlier than it should have been, that feeds into a process that then has another session or another year of political stalemate, especially if, since many of the issues that we're dealing with here are also communications issues and public perception issues, and not doing that part of it well, leaving aside the technical aspect, is also something that is risky for the ultimate goal of getting the funding. So, I realize there's political reality, but I worry that we're actually watching dysfunctional incentives push things the wrong direction.
I think that's, my microphone's still working. I think that's a good point, and I don't disagree with anything that you've said there. We've just got to make sure that we stay sensitive to the job at hand, and at the same time that we are reflective of the realities. And in fact, what you just said is a perfect segue into item 4 on the agenda, where we're going to talk about public sentiment and participation. And Carrie, I don't know if you want to kick us off on that, but this is actions and updates of ongoing work. It includes a telephone survey, the working group information that's going on there. And that working group, my goodness, wait till you hear if you haven't been following some of the stuff that they've been providing. Carrie?
Thank you, Chair. Last month, we discussed the need to change the date for the August TAC meeting. Based on a poll of all the TAC members, a revised date of August 26th was identified. Staff has prepared the revised TAC meeting agenda for your consideration and approval. Staff recommends the approval of the revised TAC agenda reflecting the August 26th meeting date, with the location remaining in San Diego. On a related matter to the TAC agenda, it has come to staff's attention that there is a conflict with the September meeting date. This meeting date coincides with the Rural County Representatives of California Annual Board of Directors Conference. The September meeting is an opportunity for the TAC to hear from the North State area on the issues of road charge. We would like to propose moving the date that would ensure the opinion leaders and stakeholders in the area are available to attend and provide public comment to the TAC. I will send you some proposed meeting dates early next week for your consideration. As reported at the April meeting, we issued letters to the legislators and other electeds. In response to those letters, Chair Medaffer, Executive Director Kempton, and CTC staff have met with a number of electeds and their staff, updating them on the progress of the TAC and the mission ahead. Overall, these meetings have been positive, and all the participants were very curious about the pilot program and what were our activities. Additionally, we emailed over 450 stakeholders offering to provide briefings and updates on the work of the TAC. As Will mentioned, Wednesday, the Commission, in collaboration with the San Joaquin Valley Regional Transportation Planning Agencies, the Fresno COG, the Fresno Chamber of Commerce, and the Fresno Economic Development Corporation, held a public forum to discuss regional and statewide transportation issues, transportation funding crisis, and potential solutions. Included in that discussion was the road charge pilot program. We did get quite a bit of feedback and some press. Also, on your table, you should have received some revised FAQs. If you could replace these with the ones that were handed out at the last meeting. The FAQs are a live document, so they will be continuing to change and evolve and grow, so we will be providing you updates probably on a monthly basis. At the April meeting, the topic of the telephone surveys and focus groups was presented as an informational item. Gary Gutierrez will be providing an update on the status of the surveys of the focus groups. At the conclusion of Gary's presentation, Laura will be providing an update on the status of the work group. Gary?
Sorry, guys. Was not expecting that. Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm going to step away. Keep my hands down. Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm pleased to be able to provide more information about Caltrans's effort to establish a baseline for the pilot project. At the April meeting, our project team explained that we were intending to...
Do me a favor and take this thing and just point it down just a little bit.
Yes.
There you go. I think it'll still pick you up.
Okay. Better? Okay. Good. At the April TAC meeting, our project team...
Gary, why don't you come over here, please?
Okay.
Don't you love these public meetings? There's always a microphone feedback issue, right?
Okay. Hey, this is better. Good. At the April TAC meeting, our project team explained that we were going to establish a baseline by first reaching out through telephone surveys, followed by focus groups. A number of committee members voiced some concern with that approach and actually suggested that we swap that order and instead place the focus groups first and then have the telephone surveys follow. It was explained that the theory behind that was that the focus groups could actually inform the questions so that we could actually craft some questions, telephone survey questions, that would be more engaging. The purpose, however, of the baseline is to establish data that is really very raw and uninformed data. We want to establish really the baseline of where is the California attitude and the California knowledge with respect to road charge. So really, we don't want questions that are informed. We really want questions that are quite neutral. So what Caltrans is intending to do is we are going to move forward with the survey questions first. And again, the questions will be addressing road charge issues, and they will be very neutral in general. Any questions about that? There's a couple other things I want to touch base on, but any questions about our approach before I move on? Okay. Along with the memo that you'll find in your packet, we also have draft survey questions. Those are the survey questions that we do intend to use for our survey effort, our telephone survey effort. I would like to point out that Commissioner Jim Arp did have an opportunity to review these questions, and we have received his comments. Unfortunately, we have not had an opportunity to incorporate his comments in the draft that you have. And so I would like to ask the TAC committee to go ahead and include Commissioner Arp's comments and then declare those questions to be final. So that would be an action that we're asking.
What's the time?
Thank you. The telephone surveys will actually begin next Friday, June 5th, and we expect that they'll go through June 15th. We're expecting to have 4 focus groups. The first 2 focus groups will occur immediately after the phone surveys. They'll actually occur the weekend of June 19th through the 21st. The other 2 focus groups will occur in July.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Where are the questions?
should be along with your memo. Oh, it's agenda item 4A. Yeah, that's fine. It should be the very next one, right after the FAQs. There you go. Professor Wax, you're right there. Okay.
So we haven't seen it.
While you're going through the packet, let me just, I don't know that all the commissioners understand who, or all the Technical Advisory Committee members understand who Commissioner Arp is. He's a member of the State Transportation Commission. And the reason that his input is, I think, very positive here is because he, in his day job, is the executive director of the California Alliance for Jobs. And the Alliance for Jobs has worked with a lot of transportation agencies around the state in terms of helping do survey work for their ahead of their sales tax measure programs. He was the co-chair of the Prop 1B campaign, involved in a lot of statewide polling with that. He is somebody who has done a significant amount of survey work in California over the last decade, specifically related to transportation kinds of activities. And so we thought that his input would be very helpful in terms of saying, do these questions make sense? I think there was some angst, certainly on my part, with respect to the first set of questions that were developed, and we think that this is a much improved document. And I will tell you that Commissioner Arp was generally impressed with the questions, was okay with them. He does have some minor suggestions, and so I think that's what Mr. Gutierrez is referring to in terms of making some tweaks going forward.
Any questions on that? We'll go through those things if you'd like. Just to add on to what Will Kempton was just saying, probably nobody in the state has polled more people, and I know, Eric, you know this, around California, and knows better and has done more focus groups, and probably has advised legislators that are currently proposing interim transportation funding measures, such as Senator Bell, Assemblymember Frazier, and others, than Jim Arp. And so I don't think anybody has his fingers on the pulse of the people of California related to transportation better than him. So the fact that we sent these questions to him, got some changes made, got some additional things in there, I think after I read them, I thought, okay, good. I just wanted to have somebody with his expertise look at it. Any questions or anything on the...
What are the changes?
Well, there were some things... Carrie, do you have them in front? I could pull them up on my computer here, the strikeout underline, if... I'll tell you specifically. I've got it. Yeah, the microphone does weird things. I guess if we... Let me turn...
Okay.
Okay, there we go. Were some minor language adjustment and some clarifications that he had suggested, but for the most part, there were nothing really substantive.
I'll go ahead and just read them, just so folks understand. If you've got the thing in front of you, look at warm-up, where he had randomized, starting with number 4. On line 5, he said, instead of the quality of roads, he added in local and state roads. Number 9, drought relief and increasing water supplies, adding that in. Is that something that people are concerned about? Under transportation priorities and funding, added in things, instead of alternative modes to driving, like bicycling and walking, he also added bus and rail service. So little tweaks like that. Number 16, instead of one idea is to eliminate the gas tax and replace it, he added, because of improving fuel efficiency and increasing the number of zero or low emission vehicles, revenue generated by the gas tax is not keeping up with maintaining, repairing streets and roads. And then goes on, one idea to ensure all users help pay for the transportation system is to eliminate the gas tax. What do you think? So those, and that was it. No, that was it. Those were the only changes. Any other questions, comments?
You're looking for our action to endorse or these or comment on them or none of the above?
No, it'd be to incorporate Commissioner Arp's comments and then to consider them final.
Yeah, we do have this listed as an action item on our agenda, basically to accept that so we can move forward. We'll get into the field. Any other questions or comments? All right, we have a motion from Eric. Is there a second? Second from Supervisor Finnegan. Any other questions, comments on the motion? Hearing. Richard?
I'd just like to say, I find this a very difficult way for us to be asked to make a decision, to have it, to read for the first time the morning of the decision. And I'll also just add that I'm not sure it will get useful information to the extent that people have so many questions that they really aren't able to meaningfully answer some of these questions. That's all I'll say.
Okay, well, let's see what happens when it comes back and look at the results. We're also going to look at focus groups as well, which I think, and any members of the TAC, as these focus groups get scheduled, they're going to be, in 4 different places around the state. I've shared with the consultants in Caltrans that I want to make sure that any member of the TAC that would like to sit in on one of those focus group sessions on the other side of the glass have that opportunity to see firsthand what people are talking about. So we'll make sure you get invited to those.
If I could just add in one thing. So this was the first time this was given to us was right now this morning. Is that correct? Okay. I mean, I think it would be helpful. I don't want to gum up the works. I think we need to move forward. But I think it would be helpful for anything that's as detailed as this, that you're looking for meaningful action on and or input on, to get this ahead would be useful.
I agree. I was not aware that this had not been distributed. I thought that it went to everybody. So my apologies. And in fact, as I'm thinking about this and people fumbling around on stuff that may not have it, we may want to come up with some kind of a matrix of documents that is, you can actually, we're getting a lot of documents, and it might not be a bad idea to have an ongoing matrix of documents that are handed out for a given meeting so everybody can look to make sure that they've got those items. Because I don't think it's fair for me, that's why I have my laptop here. I just pull the stuff up because I just keep it. That's how I file it. I can't carry paper. But I think that that's important that we have that. So we'll work on that. And my apologies for the members of the task force not getting this. I think that you can be assured, though, this poll will give us some very important feedback as we move forward in seeing, really, as it gets down to the points that, Lee, you were making earlier, how do these things get messaged down the line? And that's really what the poll's all about. Gary?
Yes, I would like to just make a brief comment with respect to this process, and I certainly appreciate committee members Mark Antonio's comment, and also Mr. Finnegan. I would like to emphasize, though, that this really is a Caltrans effort, that this survey is specifically for baseline purposes that will be used during the implementation of the pilot. So this was really provided as more of a courtesy. We certainly did want your input, but this is an effort that we're moving forward with for purposes that are down the road during the implementation. So we'll make sure we'll do a better job of getting this information in front of you beforehand. But I would like to point out that it's really a Caltrans effort. And so we're relying on information that we really are moving forward with.
If that's the case, just clarity also on what's being asked of this committee. If it's FYI, that's one thing. If it's, we want your detailed comments, that's another thing. If we need action, that's another thing.
Yeah, if this is a Caltrans thing only, then we don't even need to take action on it. Just do it. So, we're just providing input. So, Unless there's any objection, we'll just remove the motion, and there won't be any action on this. Okay? All right, let's see. Do we have anything else under item 4? Laura?
Good morning, committee members. This is an informational update on the road charge work group, which has been developed to meet the Senate Bill 1077 requirement that the TAC consult with highway users and transportation stakeholders, including representatives of vehicle users, vehicle manufacturers, and fuel distributors, and also to support the TAC as a resource to efficiently gather and provide subject matter input. Since the last TAC meeting, we have secured 3 additional work group members. We are happy to welcome Adam Geisler, representing the Native American Advisory Committee, Joe Cruz, representing the California State Council of Laborers, and Bruce Blodgett, representing the San Joaquin County Farm Bureau, as our newest work group members. Staff will provide you all with an updated roster next week. The work group held its second teleconference last week on May 20th and engaged in an active discussion on the policy decisions that the TAC will be considering at this meeting. With respect to the types of participants and vehicles that may be included in the pilot, the work group discussed the value of the pilot program as a way to gather data regarding road usage information and to contribute to informed decision making. Ultimately, however, the work group was not able to reach consensus on any specific recommendations, and work group members were encouraged to submit comments in writing on this particular issue. As you previously discussed in Agenda Item 3, 4 organizations represented on the work group submitted comment letters for your consideration: the California Taxpayers Association, the California Building Industry Association, and the Self-Help Counties Coalition. Each submitted comments addressing their recommendations on issues such as pilot program, participants, exemptions, and privacy protections. And Transform submitted a letter regarding data and information needs to understand potential social equity impacts of a road charge. Another specific issue raised during the work group discussion included the need to discuss involvement of federally recognized Native American tribes in the pilot program, and CTC staff is following up with our Native American Advisory Committee work group member on this issue. The work group will hold its next teleconference on June 16th to begin discussing feedback and input for your June TAC meeting. That concludes my informational update. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you guys have any.
All right.
I think the input from them has been, I think, really helpful. I'm sort of curious as to what they're saying in their meetings. And, you know, I don't know if there's a Heisenberg principle involved here where you don't want to listen to a meeting that's supposed to be advising. Anyway, because really all that we're getting so far are 4 letters, but I'm sure there's a lot of very useful discussion going on there by people who have been selected under the rubric of the statute. So I'm wondering, I don't have a solution to this, I'm just kind of presenting that there may be more useful information, there may be more information than is possible to accommodate. But anyway, I'm throwing out there a half-formed thought, hopefully that you'll help me form the rest of it.
We appreciate the feedback, and we want to make sure that the work group process is as informative for all of you as it can possibly be. I don't know if the TAC would like to entertain maybe having a designee listen in on all of the work group meetings. Staff could also certainly try to put together a summary. I hate to say minutes because I don't think we want to treat the work group that formally, but we could certainly provide you all with a more detailed written summary.
They're spending all their time, you know, I don't know how long these teleconferences go on, but they spend a lot of time talking through this, and they're supposed to be providing us with some advice or their opinions, and all we get are 4 very useful letters. That seems to be, I suppose that it's then incumbent on the rest of the members to decide whether or not they're going to submit comments. I suppose it's on them, but at the same time, there's a lot of intellectual effort being put into that.
Will, do you want to comment on that? Because I think you make a very good point.
I do, Mr. Chairman. So we were supposed to, Laura, correct me if I'm if I'm misguided here, but we were going to have a representative from the work group on a regular basis come to these TAC meetings to address issues that were raised in those conversations that the working group has. Now, you're shaking your head, Carrie, but that was my understanding. Okay. That was my understanding, that we're going to have that. Now, I know that there are logistical problems, and we've asked people to give up their time just as you've been asked to give up a substantial amount of your time to participate in this effort. So first of all, no question, we can provide a summary. That we can do. There won't be formal minutes, but we can certainly provide a summary of what's going on. We also can provide the telephone number for TAC members to participate in the phone calls if they would like. Our assumption, and maybe this was a wrong assumption, was that you already spend a lot of time engaged in the regular TAC activities, but we can certainly make that available as well. But I would really like to be able to have, so that we don't, it's not sort of third hand, that we don't report to you or you are just looking at written documents that come in. So there's an opportunity to have somebody from the work group to be able to address you on a regular basis to say, these are the discussions that we had, these are comments we have on the actions that you're either being asked to take in the future or that you've already taken, so that you have the benefit of that information. So we will make improvements in that communication.
Yeah, I would agree. I would hope that we've got somebody. You want to step up here, sir, and go to the mic. We'll see. Hopefully it won't scream at you.
Hi, I'm Kurt Augustine with the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers, and I'm on the working group, so I wanted to answer that. I'm not the representative by any means, but I think I'm the only one here today.
All right, so Kurt, start from the beginning. What did you guys talk
We kind of tamped down the coup talk, but we got to take over. But I think one of the initial challenges we've had is kind of forming how we're going to work together, because it's always been over the phone, so it's always a little more challenging when it's on a conference call. I think we're starting to get our sea legs there. There's been some very good discussions. It's been led by your team. We basically go through the agenda. We've had some issues raised. Laura touched on some of those things. It was a good discussion, but there was, to her point, there was not a lot of decision making done. But there is and I think part of the reason why there hasn't been a lot of reporting is generally they're comfortable with what the work product that you all have been doing. And there's been reporting, we go through that, and it's like, I think you can hear head nodding on the phone. There's a lot of agreement that the work that you're doing, you're considering it. So I think that there probably can be a little better way to report, like Will has just suggested, but there hasn't been anything really dramatic in terms of that, but the opportunity has certainly been there, yeah. So, okay, thank you.
Anybody have any questions for Kurt? I know he's going to be coming up soon and talking from the vehicle manufacturer standpoint, but specifically to the working group? No? Thank you, Kurt. Appreciate it. Laura, anything else?
No, we will take all of those comments, suggestions under advisement, and we will have an improved process for you at the June meeting.
Sounds good. We're going to have this down perfect by the time we're all done
I just want to note it will be our third meeting, and third time's the charm, so we will get it done.
No, and I got to tell you, I haven't even called in. I'm going to, on this next one I will, and I think to Will's point, we can provide the number, and let's do that to every member of the Technical Advisory Committee. You're certainly welcome to call in. But I have to say, if you've all seen that list of who's on that working group, it's a good group. The statute only allowed 15 of us. So I think it was Will's idea to really get a greater breadth of perspective from people, and I think they're doing a marvelous job there.
There's actually another member of the work group here today. Sharon Scherzinger is...
Come on, Sharon, you're hiding out from us. Thank you, Sharon. Do you want to add anything, or did Kurt do a good job? Microphone, if you could, since the public is watching. You're still not on.
Okay, there we go. Okay, it's not like SACOG where you have to hold it down the whole time. The other thing that I would add, one of the conversations that we did have, other than those things I think that were quite accurately summarized, was a discussion in regard to if you were using GPS devices, whether you were on private property or within tribal lands, how that would be handled. But that was the only other thing
And I think we
that
saw
knew.
that as a question that came in on one of the letters. So
Yes.
Sharon, just for the record, identify yourself again, just since it wasn't on the mic.
Sharon Scherzinger, Executive Director, El Dorado County Transportation Commission.
And thank you for your service to the working group. Appreciate it. Okay. I think that kind of covers everything on number 4 on our
Chair-
agenda.
Chair,
Yep.
before
Karen?
you move on, we need to take an action on the agenda, the revised agenda. Meeting schedule, meeting schedule.
Oh, that's right. So sorry. We all good on August? And then you mentioned the other date, but that's not set yet?
No, I'll do a poll for September.
Okay. So beautiful San Diego on the 26th, Wednesday, instead of Friday the 28th was the change on that. Any questions or comments on that? So I need a motion on changing the agenda. Motion from Sauer, second from Professor Wax. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? All right, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Carrie. Let's, we have a brief report, it looks like, are you going to give it, Brady, on website, item 5?
Good morning, Chairman Daffer, committee members. I will say with conviction that the Internet Highway has no potholes and doesn't need any maintenance. At the April meeting, my colleague Gary provided a sneak peek of the California Road Charge Pilot Program website, and the website went live on May 1st and has steadily been generating interest ever since. Today I'd like to provide you with a brief update on the amount of traffic that's flowing through the site, no pun intended, and this is going to include the number of public comments that we've received to date, the number of volunteers that have signed up, and the number of emails that have actually been submitted for interest on our interest list. As you can see, I've provided a dashboard of information. The intention here is actually to respond to Professor Wax's comment to bring the update back to the committee monthly. It being our first month, you'll see that this month and the year-to-date are going to be exactly the same. However, as we move forward each month, you'll see that the year-to-date will be cumulative, and we'll provide updates to you accordingly. To date, we've received 9 public comments. We have had 18 volunteers signed up and to participate in the pilot program, and 34 emails submitted to our interest list. The number of site visits accumulated to date is 2,546, and I thought something interesting that we could provide to the TAC members is the location of who's been visiting and generating the interest of our visitors. And so we decided to use a north-south split. You'll notice that we used the State Transportation Improvement Program split, which is provided in Streets and Highways Code 187. That identifies our southern, it's broken down by counties, and it's provided our southern counties include San Luis Obispo, Kern, Mono, Tulare, Inyo, Santa Barbara, Ventura, Los Angeles, San Bernardino, Orange, Riverside, San Diego, and Imperial. All other counties are considered north. You'll also see that I have an other category because we're actually generating interest from other states and other countries. The states include Arizona, Colorado, Connecticut, Florida, Hawaii, Kansas, Michigan, Nevada, New York, North Dakota, Ohio, Oregon, Tennessee, Texas, and Washington. So that's quite a bit of interest. The countries actually include Australia, India, and New Zealand. So not bad for our first month. You can see the percentage breakdown provided. I did want to share one other stat with you. It's called a bounce rate. And it represents the percentage of visitors who enter the site and then leave or bounce rather than continuing to view other pages. The bounce rate is actually a measure of the effectiveness of a website in encouraging visitors to continue with their visit. And what this really means is you have a low bounce rate, the page effectively causes visitors to view more pages. If it's high, it indicates the website's not doing a really good job of attracting continued interest of the visitors. And so I'm proud to say that our bounce rate's 50%, which Chairman Daffer and I had a discussion. He said, hey, that's actually not bad, you know. So other than that, I intend on providing you guys this update every month, and I'm willing to entertain any questions that you may have.
Let me see if Will would like to comment.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and members, I wanted to commend Caltrans for their efforts on the website. At CTC, we do not have the capability to provide that kind of support, and the staff and the department worked very hard on putting together what is, and I'm not an electronic guy, so believe me, I went on the website. It's user-friendly. I think it's going to be a very effective tool, and I want to express appreciation to the department for their work to get this out. It's a good thing.
Eric?
Yeah, I want to express the same comments. I think it's well done, well put, and appreciate the report. But collectively, what can we do to drum up more hits and more site visits to?
Eric, your question, what could be done more to get more visits? I think as we move forward following the poll, the survey, the focus groups, it will then get a better messaging platform put together, and part of what the consultants, public relations firm, Donna Lucas and Associates, that's part of what I'm hoping that they'll be able to do. So we can, in fact, whether it's through newsletters, through its various organizations, chambers, each one of us around this table here, it's incumbent on us. We'll get some message points down, and we can start sharing that. I mean, clearly, just like the public that comes to these meetings or the people that watch or the letters we get, the website is designed to give us information, give us feedback, and also, at some point, to seek volunteers. In fact, it was great. I don't think I'd be speaking out of school here. Will Kempton and I went and met with the State Board of Equalization member George Runner. He'd been very critical of the road charge effort, editorialized against it. We went and met with him, gave him just a few little pieces of information, and his big thing was, he says, wait a minute, you mean I have choices? I'm going to have choices here? All of a sudden, one of his senior staff members signed up as a volunteer for the road charge program. So it's simply a matter of getting the information out and seeing how folks, they get it. We need to pay for our roads. It's a matter of how we do it. So hopefully this website, and I agree, commend Caltrans staff, Gary, for an outstanding job on the website, and hopefully it'll be a good tool for us going forward. Professor.
Just a quick comment. There are 9 public comments. At some point, when there are 20, 30, could you give us a written summary? We don't have to take meeting time, but it would be interesting to see a summary of the comments if there are many that are made over and over again and so on.
We will absolutely work with commission staff on providing something like that.
Okay.
I would like to say there's some brochures in the back that actually have the website URL on it, and anybody's that's willing to can view it from their mobile device, laptop, computers, any method necessary. So
it is one cool website. You look at it on your iPhone this way, you see it like you would on your computer. You look at it this way, and then it's totally set just for a small mobile device. It's very intuitive. It's probably one of the best websites on the state of California I've seen. They did a really good job. So congratulations, Gary, and your team that worked on it. Okay, we move on from item 5, and let's turn it back to Carrie, and we're going to start getting, this is another information item, but we're starting now to get into some of the policy issues that are going to be incumbent in our discussions today. Carrie?
Thank you, Chair. Committee members, Shannon Crum will be recapping the action the TAC took at the April meeting and providing an overview of policy decisions the TAC will be considering today. Shannon will be teeing up the policy discussion, which will be followed by an in-depth presentation and discussion. During agenda item 11, we will be asking the TAC to make some high-level policy decisions. Shannon?
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? The voice is coming and going this morning. I apologize for that.
That probably works good for that microphone.
It's actually really good for this microphone, yes.
And Vince, you paying attention to this part, this is important for you.
Yes. So what I wanted to do to start with was bring everybody up to date with the decisions that have been made so far by the TAC. And the first, Chair Medaffer just referenced, The pilot will in fact offer motorists a choice in account managers, and the pilot will in fact offer motorists the choice in their mileage recording and reporting methods, so that nothing will be dictated to volunteers in the pilot program. The third decision that has been reached to date is that out-of-state vehicles will be included in the pilot, and they will be assessed a fee for driving on California's roads. The fourth decision that has been taken to date is that the pilot will test an open...
Can I just stop you just on that just for a
Yes.
second? Because you just made a point, there'll be assessed fee, but everybody just keep in mind, this pilot does not contemplate collecting a dime. It's a pilot just to see if it works, should we collect money.
Right.
And I just want to make that point.
They'll get a bill in the mail.
People, yeah, they'll get the bill. People watching this for the first time sometimes may just think that they're going to start getting charged. This pilot is designed to see if we can actually turn this into a real-world situation. I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you for that clarification. The fourth item that has been decided to date is that the pilot will test an open system design with the aim of encouraging innovation and competition and reducing costs as the system moves forward. And then the fifth element that's been determined so far is that the pilot will test interoperability with California's system and other states' road charge systems, so that moving into the future, California is able to kind of blaze the trail and hopefully not end up in the position that many of the nation's toll systems are in, where you have to have a separate account and separate reporting method everywhere you go. I just want to remind everybody that all of these decisions are open to be revisited as new information is developed, and we'll be working with you through the summer on that. That brings us up to this month, and this month we would like to reach decisions on 4 very important policy areas. The first has to do with what types of participants to recruit to volunteer for the pilot. And here we've identified 4 classifications. There may be more, something that you have thought of that we didn't. But the 4 that we're proposing are individuals, which would just be private citizens who register one at a time. Please note that individuals could register more than one vehicle, so that it can be a many vehicle to one participant ratio. Or we could recruit households to participate. Households are, of course, comprised of individuals. The difference there would be that there's the potential, if you have, say, spouses and a couple of driving age or older children, and they're all participating as a unit, they could test multiple recording and reporting devices within the household and have the opportunity to kind of compare and contrast within that unit, and there could be some good data that comes out of that. Businesses would be another group to attempt to recruit, as well as government agencies. The benefit that businesses and government agencies could provide compared with individuals or households is to really look at what it takes for an entity with many, many vehicles to comply, and also what opportunities are there to provide things like fleet management services from the account providers that might make it easier for them to participate or attractive for them to participate. So that's the first question. The second big question is which vehicles to include. Do we want to recruit a cross-section of all vehicles that are currently using roads in California? Do we want to just recruit some subset? In the briefing book, we laid out, I believe, 8 different combinations that are based on fuel type, vehicle weight. You could base it on type of use, whether it's private use or commercial use. You could base it on age of the vehicle, so that only newer vehicles or only older vehicles. I honestly didn't do the math, but you could probably slice or dice it several tens of thousands of ways by the time you took in all the different permutations. So it's an important consideration. The third question has to do with what types of mileage exemptions this group would like to recommend to be tested in the pilot. And in the briefing book, we discussed that you can talk about exemptions in terms of road uses that are exempted. So for instance, not charging for mileage driven on private roads. And we were thinking of private roads as roads that truly have been built and are maintained by an individual or by a business off of the public road system, and so don't use any public money. Or out-of-state driving would be another example of a road use, as well as the methods that would be tested. So using a location-based reporting device, it would just know whether you were on a public road or out-of-state or on a private road and would assess the fee based on that. If you choose one of the more manual options, we would need to test some mechanism for either requesting an exemption or a deduction of that mileage over a reporting period. And it could range from something like a standard deduction similar to what you get on your when you're reporting your income tax. Everybody just gets 200 miles off the top or 2,000 miles off the top or whatever decision you take there. Or it could be some more formal reporting requirement, similar again to your income taxes. If you want to go beyond the standard deduction, you have to provide some paperwork to demonstrate that mileage was in fact on private roads or out of state. The fourth question for the month is what specific personal privacy protections should be used for the pilot. There are some standard rules, regulations, and laws in place already in California, and obviously the pilot would need to comply with those. But there could be some additional steps taken for the purposes of the pilot, and we'll ask you to consider those today. Several of these questions are interrelated, as they always are, and I just wanted to bring up the point that the two questions about what kinds of vehicles to include and who to include are very closely tied. It's really kind of simple to just knee-jerk say, oh, we'll just do passenger vehicles. Well, that excludes a significant portion of the fleet that it may be worth testing just to find out how it works. Or you could say, oh, we'll just do private registers that are vehicled as private vehicles, or we'll just do 18-wheelers, or we'll just do motorcycles, or we'll just do some classification. There's a lot of balancing that goes on between the way vehicles are classified and registered and the kinds of organizations, whether they be individuals, households, businesses, or government agencies that use those vehicles. And so I would just urge you to keep that in mind, that as we move through the discussions today, that balancing act, hopefully keep it at the back of your mind. Also keep in mind that moving forward, these decisions that you take today will inform some of the decisions next month. Next month, we'll continue with related to the privacy discussion and talking about data security requirements, which has to do with more technical requirements for ensuring that data is protected. But we'll also start to talk about how many participants need to be included, and how those participants should be distributed throughout the state. What the north-south divide should look like, what the urban-rural divide should look like. And I would suggest, just based on some of the discussion I heard this morning about wanting to make sure that tribal nations are included in the discussions at least, should you decide to include them in the pilot, it might be worth testing an exemption method that is complementary to current exemptions that occur. Same thing kind of goes with agriculture. So keeping in mind the interplay of all of those different bits and pieces to ensure that we come up with a cohesive program that makes sense. What I will also suggest is that in July you'll have a chance to revisit all of this. That's why there's a big blank spot on the schedule in July. So if there are any questions, we're happy to entertain. Otherwise, we will start to dive into some of the content for this month.
Marty?
So that, by the way, I read the materials, and what's to come is very informative and helpful. but to put it into the proper context, I need to understand better. Presumably, the pilot test involves only volunteers. We're recruiting people to volunteer.
Yes.
And our chairman mentioned that people wouldn't actually be paying money into a trust fund. Does that mean that for the pilot test, the issues that we address regarding privacy, someone has volunteered, is, and the issues regarding exemptions are specific to the pilot, or are they supposed to mimic what would actually happen in an implemented system? If someone volunteers, the obligations regarding privacy would seem to me to be less demanding than if we're imposing then the legislature is imposing a fee requirement on the citizens of the state. How does what you do in the pilot relate to what you expect to do in an implemented system? How did you work on those issues?
Right. So I think that happens when two people are making noise at the same time. That this is
Hard
what
to
I've
say. It's
come
bizarre.
to. I'll give you a two-part answer to that. The whether you would want to test a different set of parameters, be it on exemptions or participation or vehicles or privacy or any of those things, than what you expect would ultimately be an operational system, that is your choice, your purview. From a strictly scientific curiosity standpoint, it might be interesting to test some things that you don't expect would happen, just to find out what would happen. But what I will say is that in these pilots, what happens during the pilot tends, in public perception, to become what will happen moving forward. So I would suggest that you keep that in mind. We know that perception is not always reality, but...
Yeah, Marty, if I could just, it'd be my intention, and I believe everything I've collected from members of this task force to date, is that this pilot needs to imitate and replicate exactly what would be rolled out. The only exception is dollars, because the legislation did not provide for that. And let me call in Supervisor Bartlett and then Laura.
Just to take into account all the nuances between toll lanes versus toll roads. For instance, in South Orange County, we have toll roads that are privately funded, but they are maintained by the state of California, by Caltrans. And then we have toll lanes that will be in the future funded and maintained with the dollars that are generated from the revenue on those toll lanes. And then with regard to the privacy protections, take a look at what the methodology for the transportation corridor agencies, because they do a great job in collecting the necessary data from the users, but also maintaining a high level of personal privacy protection, so they can provide some valuable information to you.
Thank you. That's really good input.
Lauren and then Norma.
I don't know that this is the time to have this discussion, but I would like to have a discussion about the points that that you just made, which was, somehow I missed it last month, that there will not be any transactions, any money transactions in the pilot. At least that's what's being contemplated. And maybe everybody on the committee is satisfied with that, but I've got some real questions about whether that's a good idea to not do that. And I don't want to interrupt the agenda today if it's not, but I'd be very interested in understanding the alleged legal impediments to that and the policy reasons why we don't do it and why it's a good idea, or why the decision seems to be that we're not going to be collecting money, when that's seems to me to be a big part of what happens in a fee, in a new fee, is the actual collection of the fee. So anyway, I don't want to insert a big issue into the middle of a busy agenda, but I'd like to, maybe it should go into the parking garage or the parking lot, or or some future meeting or something, but it's something that is, I have a lot of questions about.
Well, and I think you raised a very legitimate point. Maybe Norma can address that. And again, please, the whole reason we're having these discussions open and flexible like this is to delve into those things. And Norma, do you want to address that and what the legislation talked about?
Correct. The legislation did not allow us to actually do collection, but we are working with a number of other state agencies like Board of Equalization, like the controllers, Department of Motor Vehicles, to find out exactly where some of this information comes from today, and if we're doing a pilot, how would this work within those organizations? So we can certainly come back and have that discussion with this group at a future meeting, because we have that work underway as well.
So is it I mean, the legislation is silent on it. It didn't prohibit you. Is it your position that you could only do this if the legislation was explicit on it?
On the ability to collect taxes.
Okay, and was there any legislative history? And I appreciate that position from the. I appreciate it more than you probably know. But was there some legislative history also that suggested that the legislature actually didn't really want you to do this because for whatever reason?
Will, can you help me out on this? Because I think part of it is getting the 2/3 vote to be able to implement anything like that.
Yeah, I think I could speak loud enough. Oh, there's staying on. I absolutely think that the issue was the having to authorize a collection process, a tax, as it were. Obviously, SB 1077 would have had to have a 2/3 vote requirement if it went forward, and that. So I believe that was the issue. There's no legislative history that I'm aware of that says we should not be, if we're going to do some sort of a pilot program along these lines, that we should not be collecting revenue. I don't think that was the issue. I think it was more of a procedural kind of a thing. And as I explained to Lauren outside the room, that if that became an issue, that is something that we could certainly raise and consider.
And nothing keeps us, as part of this process, you always have to be worried about opening Pandora's box. But at the same time, that if the pilot can be done in a way to where everything but the exchange of money effectively is there, then we've achieved that. But to your point, Lauren, and I'll call you Lee, it's not the lawyer here, but the issue is, under the state law, unless it's a 2/3 vote imposing a tax, and then you have Prop 218 issues that come into play where, unless you're replacing an existing tax, then there's 218 requirements. So there's a lot of nuances to this thing, which is, where I think we just want to make sure, can we create a structure that makes sense? Are we addressing the fundamentals like privacy first, and then what the process is? But I don't disagree with where you're going, and maybe part of what we talk about as we meet with legislative leaders is share that sentiment. Lee?
Yeah, I have thought about the targeting of the actual money issue, but I agree that politically it's just very, very likely that the shape of the building only exists in a certain form because of that. It's difficult to go around, but although I suppose one would always wanted to ask the legislature to add something to it, but that is, as you say, open to the forms. I just wanted to check on whether or not changes in the evaluation of the information flows because of that.
Okay, so that's a very good point that Lee's just raised. So back to the consultants and the staff, let's make sure we get follow-up at the next meeting, that exactly his point, that you can collect $0, but we want to still make sure that we're going through all of those motions, every nuance that would be required, with the exception of handing over 1 penny. And I agree with that completely, because there are privacy issues. And again, as you've all heard with me, I've said privacy from day one is the top and most important issue on this matter. Otherwise, it's a non-starter with the public. Any other questions or comments? Okay, we good? All right. Eric?
And I don't want to bog down the meeting anymore, but Lauren brings up a great point. If you're swapping out the current practice, it's pretty simple now where you pay at the pump, it's collected there. For fleets, if they're tested in a pilot, which we haven't voted yet, but if commercial vehicles are included in the pilot, you're talking about fleets that there could be a 1-truck or 2-truck operator that's in the pilot, but you're also talking about this would apply to a fleet of hundreds or thousands of pieces of equipment. And so administratively on collecting that fee, I hope it's built in. I mean, I know we haven't voted for it, but I hope it's built into the process, regardless if they're doing a transaction of money or not, that we have a good handle on how that's going to work. Because it could be an administrative nightmare for a person who has 500 trucks that operates in California, and that's something that we haven't really addressed. So.
Shannon or Jeff, do you want to respond to either of these things that have been talked about?
Okay, let's give this microphone a try. Once the TAC decides what the vehicle fleet population that you're going to test will be, we will definitely go back and present to you probably the very next month what the implications of that are, not only from an operational side, but from the end user side as well. Because as you remember, when Matthew was here last month, he walked us all through what the operational concepts would look like to the driver, but we didn't actually take it the next level, which it would be, what does this look like to a fleet?
Okay. Steve?
I was holding off. I think Jim covered most of what I wanted to say, but I think it was a revelation to me at the last meeting that money wouldn't change hands. And I understand there may be limitations on authorization and whatnot, but I think the key, and I think several of us are trying to get around that point, is this needs to be fully tested. We don't need to test the functionality of credit card charging systems. That exists. But everything up on either end of that needs to be thoroughly tested and evaluated. And that includes people's reactions to all of this. And the people react differently when it's fake money and real money. And so I think that somehow needs to be addressed.
Excellent points. Excellent points. Anything else, Carrie or Shannon, on number 6? I think we kind of went through that deck.
That was a no for the record.
Supervisor Bartlett.
I can see not collecting the actual dollars because during the pilot program, they're still going to be filling up at the pump, paying gas tax, and then you've also got the VMT on top of that. So then, how do we deal with that? But on a monthly basis, I think for the pilot program, it's going to be interesting, and I hope that we give the information to the pilot program participants so that they can back out the portion of the gas tax on a monthly basis of what they would pay, because they need to figure out if they're filling up once a week and at the pump, they're paying X dollars total. And with the VMT program, what would they be paying? So they've got a basis for comparison, because that information is going to be really valuable to the all of us on a monthly basis. If they come out at the end of 2 months and they're saying, my gosh, under VMT I'm going to be paying $95 more than I would be just filling up at the pump paying the gas tax. So we want to make sure we give them all of the information so that we get back valuable information from the actual people that are in the pilot program, because then we can modify the VMT formula if we need to perhaps better mimic what is realistic and reasonable.
Outstanding point. And let me just throw out one thing, and this goes, I'll send this to you, Will, and this is something for the lawyers to come back on. But nothing prohibits us, I would think, from when people sign up, if they wanted to volunteer, that they would have money collected and just maybe with the stipulation that it's refunded, after a certain number of months. I mean, that's a question I'd like to know. Is that even possible? Can people, it's not like it's an imposition from a tax standpoint, but if they wanted to volunteer to provide that information so the whole transaction is looked at, is that a possibility? I'd just like to get an answer on that. Again, it would be people volunteering. They're volunteering for the pilot. Are they able to volunteer where I would give my credit card number or bank account number? I'll go through the motions, but also I get something as part of that form that I know I'm going to get all that money back. Because to your point, I mean, I'm paying the gas tax all along.
That is a question that we will work with Caltrans and CTC and their attorneys to find out the answer to. And to your point, the model that we have been proposing is that every month when someone receives their invoice, for those people who have chosen one of the automated devices that will go into their vehicle, they will receive sort of a amount due for miles driven and also show an estimate of the amount of gas tax they did in fact pay to drive those miles, and then the invoice would show the difference between the two. And some drivers, based on the kind of vehicle that they have, will always be owed money by the state, and some drivers will owe a small amount to the state.
Supervisor Finnegan and then Professor Wax.
Yeah, I think that pretty much answered my question, but I also want you to refresh my memory. Is Oregon, did they actually pay dollars? Because I remember talking about receipts that showed that somebody had a reimbursement due.
Yeah, I think they did. Who wants to comment on that? Jeff?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. It is contained a more full description in your packet. You have the answers to the very question, but the short answer is in the second pilot that Oregon did, most of the volunteers actually paid real money. The ones that did not were out-of-state participants. No, this is the one that concluded, and now that they're moving forward, everyone in the pilot will pay.
Professor Wax and then Richard.
I was going to say what was just said. So, but in addition, at Georgia Tech, a program was run with something on the order of dozens of participants in which they were given money at the beginning, and then they paid it into a charging system which involved paying per mile of travel. So one possibility would be, certainly with a small sample, but not a large one, would be to actually give people money and then take it back in fees.
Okay. Richard?
Yeah, I suppose a prepaid credit card could serve that purpose. I mean, all of this, though, assumes that we're going to be recommending and the pilot is going to be testing a particular number of cents per mile. And it's not clear to me if that's in our future decision.
I don't think it is. I mean, that's a very good
or
point,
whether
too.
it should be, or, it's just not clear. Yeah. I think there's a lot of discussion we can have.
I think we've always said that, the amount that the charge might be is, again, a legislative policy call. If it's a complete replacement to the gas tax today, I've heard it's about 1.5 cents a mile. If it's going to be indexed to actually cover what the real costs are, it might be 3 cents a mile. We don't know, but that's, again, the legislature, they're going to end up having to make that decision. We're looking at the structure. Would this work? And then from there, leave it to the legislative body to actually make that imposition. Any other questions or comments on our decision schedule? Supervisor?
Question, how do we take into account some of the things that utilize gas now but don't actually get onto the road? Gas generators or tractors on farms, things like that.
That is one of those items that you will be making a decision on today in your list of exemptions.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yard trucks. That was one that struck my mind. Norma?
Well, at some point during this deliberation, we will have to come up with a rate to simulate the pilot. So whether, we set it at what's today's rate, whatever, I mean, we do need to come up with something in order to make the pilot work. It's not what the legislature would ultimately decide, or whoever the policymakers are at the time, if this were to go forward, but we do need to set something in a future meeting.
Exactly. And I'll just comment on it. The legislation if you look at the bill closely, it doesn't really say what you can't do. It says what you can do. So this committee can pretty much recommend what it wants. And I think that's the nice latitude that you all have. So keep that in mind as we move forward. You have a lot of flexibility there. All right. I think we've done well on number 6. Let's, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Kurt Augustine, who is the Director of State Affairs for the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers, and he's here to give us their perspective on road charging. And Kurt, as you go to the podium, I'm going to ask, would you mind turning the podium to the left a little bit? Let's see if the angle changes the acoustical dynamics of the room. Thank you.
Good morning again, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. Just briefly, as the chairman said, I'm with the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers, which is an association of 12 of the auto manufacturers in the world, and approximately 80% of the cars sold in the United States are made by our member companies. So let me go into what for us is an incredibly important issue regarding transportation infrastructure funding. We have been involved in this issue for many years, and specifically on road user charges, I have personally been on both the Washington and Oregon task force and working in a very similar group to this, so it's an incredibly important issue to us. First off, the auto manufacturers strongly support the effort to address our infrastructure needs and to find additional revenues. It is clear, as has been mentioned earlier, the trend is not our friend in terms of revenue. You all know that, and we recognize that for our customers, the driving public...
Can we quote you on that? The trend is not our friend.
Right, yes.
Okay, we're going to make that as a new button.
Right. So, for our customers, the driving public, they need to have good, reliable, safe roads, and we strongly support that. In fact, for well over a decade, we have advocated in not just maintaining revenues, but increasing revenues, especially in major states like here in California, where we're, as you know, hundreds of millions of dollars short of our infrastructure needs. We have even advocated for all measures, including increasing the gas tax, looking at road user things. I mean, we firmly support the need for increased revenues. Now, specifically on some of the things that we have been wrestling with on how this would be done, you can see on the slide some of the things that we have talked about. The first point, actually about study and thoughtful implementation, I would endorse most of the comments that you all just were discussing about how this should be a robust, complete system. We completely agree. I think Mr. Finnegan's comments about saying is essentially everything right up until the payment transactions makes perfect sense, and that's exactly what we have strongly recommended. We certainly wouldn't want all the efforts to go to waste on a project that didn't set up right and it was kind of a swing and a miss in the public's eye. So we strongly endorse it. And I won't belabor that point. The one point, though, that I do absolutely have to stress from the auto manufacturer's point is that at any pilot program or any final road user charge program that would ever become implemented in any state in the union is automakers do not want to be mandated to have to report on the driving behaviors of their customers. That is an absolute position that we will not deviate from. I want to be clear, that doesn't mean that the technology on the vehicle can't be used in that, but we do not want to be in a place where we are, as the companies, are reporting to the DMV or Caltrans that our client drove X number of miles, that type. And that's, again, a position that we are rock solid on. In terms of what types of vehicles should be in the pilot or on a real program, we believe that they need to be technology neutral on the way they're powered and also the miles per gallon. There have been discussions around the country saying, okay, only zero-emission vehicles should be in place, or only vehicles that get 55 miles per gallon or more. We believe that a holistic solution needs to be the ultimate answer to this, and picking technological winners and losers is not advantageous for anybody, and we believe that all should be in. I think it's, especially as you're considering the pilot aspect, because due to some of the certain technologies that are available, it is important to have the alternative fuel vehicles in it, because many of the possible ways to be able to track what someone's road user charge would be through some devices that are on the vehicle currently, but those aren't on electric vehicles, for instance. So you have to make sure that with the electric vehicles, as they're coming on, in place, because we again, back to our point of having a whole solution and all the needs. We're part of the problem as automakers for the revenue situation. We have thousands of people who are working 24/7 making cars that have higher miles per gallon and electric vehicles, and so we know that while that's the right thing to do and that's what we're compelled to do by both state and federal laws, we're contributing to that problem. We want to be part of the solution, and we think looking at the whole vehicle passenger, and I'm speaking only to passenger vehicles specifically on folks who I represent, we believe they should all be there. I do want to make it clear on some of the technologies that I've alluded to. Right now, there are, as things have been contemplated around the country, there are different devices, apps, that can be used to either track the mileage, the usage type of thing. Any manufacturer is not planning on using current vehicle technology to offer road user charges. If this did become the actual law, our companies are not contemplating actually being part of that. As one high-ranking company official recently told me, he says, we're in the business of selling cars, not selling data. We are not going to risk alienating our customers for getting in the business of reporting on them. Now, there's a little about the technology. I've used the word telematics, and that has many, many definitions. Now, the many options that are being contemplated around the country often use a plug-in device to the onboard diagnostics port, which is typically under the steering wheel of any car. Those are produced by many different companies. They're used all over the world. You all have talked about them earlier. Flo from Progressive, she uses the device in their commercials and their lighting. That we do not consider that telematics. That is an onboard diagnostic that is both used for air quality repairs. It's used be able to use for the road user charge type of things. The telematics is a slightly, in our definition, is different than that. We've used a term called the center stack, and that is where you see the display screens, the GPS, that type of thing. We do not believe that type of equipment that is privately developed by our companies should be utilized to do that. The entire issue of our company's products being used to track the location of our customers and on the technology that we have developed is an issue that we do not want to get involved in. But again, I do want to be clear that OBD port information, that is available to the public. For instance, in Washington, all the solutions that have been contemplated by the Washington Task Force there, including those technological devices that plug into the car, we support, we're fine with, we have no opposition to. It's actually tapping into our actual, in our definition, the telematics, geolocation technology. That's a concern for us. And I mean to briefly explain to that. That's my next point in consumer privacy and data. And you've touched on that, and it is paramount to our customers and to our manufacturers. As such, last year in November, the manufacturers that I represent and the smaller trade association that makes up the balance of the 20% of vehicles that I don't represent, all vehicle manufacturers in the country entered into an agreement with the Federal Trade Commission on data principles and security. I'm not going to go through these, but you can see what the principles address. All these issues: choice, transportation, data security, and integrity. These are and that is what I handed out before I spoke. You can see the agreement. Those are the agreements that the companies have made with the government, that in all their contracts, service agreements, they will adhere to all those principles. So that is not the actual contract, but those are the principles that the companies will adhere to. You can see this. It's available on our website on that address at the bottom line. Again, this is, we cannot stress how important that the data privacy is. It is an incredibly volatile issue, and it's one that we have made as a core issue within our companies, that we will not release data on our customers' behaviors certainly without their consent. There is an incredible amount of data that is generated by vehicles. That data cannot be released without anyone's consent, nor do we really encourage the release of that. And the reason that we don't encourage it is on these issues, primarily of cybersecurity. There's been a lot in the media regarding this. Things that are available in the car: owner and vehicle data, how it's driven, where it's mileage, that type of thing. That is important. That any system that is contemplated by any of the road user solutions recognizes that these vehicles have a tremendous amount of data, and it has to be absolutely secure. Even things like the vehicle controls, these can be hacked into, and we have to make sure. I mean, they can. There are unfortunate examples where you can see it on the internet, where hackers have got in and can control some of the vehicle operations. Also, through the emission systems controls, especially the OBD port, which that's its primary function. You can take over and override the emission systems on a vehicle if you wanted to. Obviously, that is something that we don't want, and I think as a society we most certainly don't. And then the other issue is any systems that are contemplated tapping into especially the telematics portion, is respecting the intellectual property rights of the companies. The companies have spent billions of dollars developing these products, and to have that given away by a legislative mandate is unacceptable to us. And I think these are revolutionary ideas, but they are things that we need to stress. But in conclusion, again, we are incredibly supportive of this. And as I said, the time and energy we have spent around the country on this has demonstrated that. And the template that we have supported in Washington, I think, is one that you have been building on. And we endorse those technologies. And I'd be happy to answer any and all of your questions.
Well, Kurt, first of all, I just want to offer a couple of comments. Thank you for being here, number one, and I appreciate your sharing the perspective that you have. You said a key word, and I just want to ask you a question on that. And it's interesting, in looking at the history of the OBD port, 1991, the California Air Resources Board made it mandatory that all new vehicles sold in California in 1991 have some basic OBD capability. And then in 94, they went to OBD2, which was a much more rigorous specification. And then in 1996, the federal government made it standard. So that happened over a 5-year period. And the earliest OBD was 1968. Volkswagen introduced something back then. I'm just looking at Wikipedia. Not that I'm any expert on this. But I raised the point because you said a key word, and I'm not going to put you on the spot now other than to say I'd love to have further discussions with you, in your capacity representing vehicle manufacturers. just being a technologist, if I'll call myself that for a moment, or a futurist and seeing where things are going. With consent, and that's the key word you used, I picked that up, is there any objection that if a standard set of data protocol was established, and I think what we're doing here in California will go for the rest of the country, do you sense that your manufacturers would have objection if vehicle owners consented that a certain data set be made available from that center stack that you referred to?
At this point, the answer would be no.
Okay.
Because of the risks that we've just discussed, that there's just, the vehicle integrity is at great risk if that's even with the consent. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that as future developments go and work, and it really kind of depends on what we're talking about too. But in general, any direct access into that would be strongly resisted by our companies.
Well, I do think that, and I appreciate that answer, and those are things that I think that we should be discussing, because I'll just say this from my own perspective, as I, having been involved in the political world for the last 30 some odd years, the public is going to have little interest in anything that takes any additional effort than what they have today when it comes to putting $5 at number 3 and they're paying for the road system. If it's going to take a lot more effort, it's never going to work. So we're going to have to figure out a way as vehicles move forward, whether it is different than that center stack or different than that OBD port, something that makes sense to provide information that protects privacy, that gives them the ability to opt in, and also, at the end of the day, makes it ubiquitous and transparent to the user. So I just, and I'd like to have further discussions, perhaps, myself and Will and any members of the task force that are interested in sitting down with you to talk about it. I would hope you'd be open to that.
Oh, absolutely.
Very good.
It's very important to us, too.
Thanks.
Yes, so.
Stephen?
Thanks so much. I want to echo two sentiments, actually, that Jim had. One, thanks for being here. Thanks for being part of the working group. Thanks for your comments. I think it's vital that the automakers are part of this. I know you've been involved with other states, so we appreciate that very much. And
thank you.
We'll keep you involved as much as you want to be on this process. One question, sort of following on to Jim's on the technology issue, is the OBD port itself may not exist forever. And again, this may be farther reaching down in the future, but there probably does need to be some dialogue on, if the OBD port is not available, there's got to be some other means to get this kind of information, if there will be a technology-based option, which we're contemplating there will be.
And continuing the OBD history lesson, let me all, first off, your history is accurate, but what's important to note that any vehicle earlier than model year 1996 really won't work in these technologies. The OBD1 port, very rudimentary. So that's one thing that will have to be considered in the pilot project and in any rules. How are you going to treat pre-96 vehicles, and how are you going to get that data? Now, that number of vehicles is dwindling. Obviously, we're talking about 20-year-old vehicles now. However, they're still out there, and they won't be able to have a plug-in solution to get their mileage. That's just not going to work. As to the future, for the foreseeable future, there will be onboard diagnostic ports. In fact, the federal government and the Air Resources Board are working on an OBD3, if you will, right now. So it's definitely going to be there for the foreseeable future. But as I touched upon, there is no OBD port on an electric vehicle. Because remember, it's an emissions control system. Well, there's no emissions on an electric vehicle. So that's for those vehicles, that isn't an option at all. And so, as we craft this pilot, we have to be very aware of that. So, okay.
There's got to be other questions. Lee.
Yeah, and then, I'm glad that they're working on an OBD3 because of the security problems that exist in the OBD2, which is been well documented. I just wanted to flag for people, it's not really within the scope of our work, but last year we worked on a bill that would address some of these security and car manufacturer and drivers and owners' rights with respect to the vehicles. I mean, one of the things that doesn't touch directly on what we're doing here, but we've always thought that Californians, especially, and Americans, believe that they own their cars and should be able to tinker with them, and that ends up creating a tension when you if you push too hard on the security side, because the instinct of the vendors is going to be to lock everything down, so you can't get in and do something bad. But at the same time, there are plenty of ordinary people and car hobbyists and enthusiasts and tinkerers who want to take their cars apart, understand how they run, understand how to optimize them, understand the data that the car collects about them from their own privacy and security standpoint. And so the access by the actual car driver, owner, user is a really important component of this. And when, this is one of the things we pointed out to Senator Markey when they did their report on car security, was that a number of the policy proposals that they were thinking about completely ignored the individual owner's interest in being able to muck around with the insides of their cars. So I just wanted to raise that as an independent consumer and driver interest that has to be respected.
And that's a very valid point. And Chapter 3 of the OBD history lesson is another element. On the OBD port, as a result of negotiations in Massachusetts and with the federal government, all the auto manufacturers have signed a memorandum of understanding that allows that data that comes out of the OBD port to be accessible. It essentially is a $100 scan tool that whether they are a dealer service person or an independent service person, has that right to get that information. So your point is spot on. We did agree to that, and in the ongoing future, consumers will have access to that. And it's essentially that has been the practice, but now it's been codified into a memorandum of understanding.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Augustine? Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Very much appreciate it. And we'll look forward to working with you as we make this.
Absolutely. I look forward to it too. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. Appreciate it. At this point, I'm going to call on a member of the public who's here who needs to leave. He wants to speak on agenda item 13, Tim Fortier. I hope I pronounced that right. Thank you very much for being here. Oh, hit that button down below you there to light up the microphone. There you go.
Okay. Thank you for taking me. I appreciate your letting me advance here. My name is Tim Fortier. I'm president of Commercial Transfer, which is a truck line here in Fresno. And contrary to the earlier comment today, we're glad you're here in Fresno. We think it's a lot better than Burbank. So, but my company is 124 years old. 5 generations have worked in it. And we were around when the horse and buggy era. So in my career, I've served as I'm a past president of the California Trucking Association, Catholic educated, went to St. Mary's College, graduate work at University of San Francisco. What I have observed in these proceedings and in the dialogue for the last 6 months is I think what you have done here, and this panel is here to decipher whether a methodology of collecting additional taxes for the roads and bridges and highways, which I'm strongly in favor, as well as my association, is I think what you've got is a group think. That's a behavioral term from that people will search out and see what has been out there. And because of that, with the state of Oregon, which has been mentioned throughout this discussion, you've gravitated to what they do. You have looked at their system as far as a methodology to collect taxes. whereas maybe you have not looked at the cost and the bureaucracy that it takes to collect those taxes. I've had 25, 30 years experience with their tax system in Oregon as a California carrier, and I found it, you have to deal with the bureaucracy. Their collection costs and auditing costs are quite pronounced. You send them $100, but it costs them maybe $20 to collect it. Now, I'm sure the figures are not that much, but I do want to make that emphasis. This state does not need another bureaucracy to monitor 10 million cars in California. That means to me, if they're going to duplicate Oregon, something like it, you're going to have to chase 10,000 people to collect the money. You're going to have to system to try to collect the money. Whereas presently, you get paid by big oil. The moment it's delivered into my tank, delivered into my yard, the taxes are paid. You mail out 7 checks or 7 bills every month, and you collect the money. And I'll tell you, it's a lot easier to collect from Standard Oil than from Commercial Transfer. You know, if I can delay that payment, I'm going to do it because I live on cash flow. The study that you're involved here now is expensive, quite sophisticated, but I think there's avenues here that probably 10 people right here could sit around a table and pretty much cut up the pie about how it should be. Earlier I talked with a few guests here, and they were concerned about the electric car or any other vehicle that's not on gasoline. And that's simple. Put an asterisk on the DMV type of car, that triggers a computer. You figure out the average miles that the average car in California drives, figure out the taxes on that, put it on the DMV bill. You've got your money. But to go and monitor, in my business, to contend with the Oregon tax cost me at least 1 day's work for one of my staff. Now, I know that's not a great deal of money, but you start compounding that. The biggest thing is trying to chase 10,000 people for the money. And if you have a system where you get the money up front, it's not felt. So the issue here that I see is that it's a matter of the political will to tackle raising a tax. Now, 90% of my people or of my industry are heavily Republican. I am still a Democrat. But our roads need repair. We understand it. If we have the political will to meet the challenge, and we have the discipline to keep the money for its purpose. We had a highway trust fund in California. That was robbed. We've had a national highway trust fund. That's been robbed to other purposes. And now for the last year and a half, that's all you hear about, the deteriorating road condition, bridge conditions. And this is what we've created the problem, by not having the discipline and the will to make it. So the issue with regards to this problem that we face today is a result, at least in this state, from 30 years ago when we neglected for 8 years any road building, maintenance. I will recall the name of Adriana Gianturca. She was hired to run a certain agenda in this state, and we suffered. We are suffering for it now. She literally, at that time, destroyed Caltrans, which is, at that moment, was the best engineering company and organization in the world. People would come from all over and go there and get educated, learn what are they doing different in California. And look where we're at today. Had we followed that discipline, had we continued to fund that, we would not have to have this meeting today. So I just ask that we learn from our history. I thank you for joining this endeavor because it does benefit all of us. We have lost a concept in this state and in our educational system, and it's called a public utility concept. We all chip in, create roads, dams, bridges, telephone systems. I frequently use this example. There's a little community out here in Huron, California. It's about 35 miles from here. And to build the road and the infrastructure to go out there, if we had to make that cost, if they had to pay for that, those farmers out there, it never would have been built. But because we as a society made an investment in our infrastructure, we don't have $10 a head lettuce. So this is what we're charged with here. And I see some things that if we had a stronger will, I don't mind paying the taxes. Because certainly in my life, I have benefited. Anybody who has a car, no matter what its age, benefits by the highway, by the streets. Whether they just use it one day a month, it's important to them to have that access. And we as a society benefit because how do you place a value on someone leaving their home and maybe going over to visit their sick mother that's 10 miles away once a month?
Ken, could I ask you to summarize, please?
Keep focused on what the real purpose is to, I think the system that we have today is adequate. I think the system that we have will benefit the public. Yes, there are quirks that we have to adjust regarding the electronic car. And that can be done as previously expressed. So that's all I have to say. I wanted to just get the direction and remind you of a little bit of history, and there are some practical things that I hopefully have brought to the table that you can think about.
Tim, thank you. Thank you very much for that, and you did raise some excellent points, and in fact, cost of collection you'll be hearing about later today is something that is very sensitive to this, to the consultants. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I need to make an announcement for any folks that are observing the proceedings on the webcast. We're having some difficulties with the webcast. I don't profess to know at all what those are about. However,
probably got hacked.
We are going to
through the OBD2 port.
We are going to be hardwiring it. Is that the correct term? We're going to be hardwiring the webcast here in a few moments, so you should have a steady stream, if I'm using the correct lexicon, in a few moments. Is that accurate, Ms. Branson?
I'll tell you what we're going to do. I know we're coming up on lunch, and we also have item 8 on the agenda, but we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll resume in 10 minutes. So it is currently 11:20. We'll resume at exactly 11:30. Thank you. If I could ask everybody to take their seats, we're still going to try to break for lunch at 12 noon. So we're going to resume the meeting after that little break due to technical issues. Hopefully they'll get them figured out. We're now going to move to item 8 on our agenda, and Jeff Doyle is going to give a presentation regarding privacy protections in the California Road Charge Pilot Program. And I'm just going to say we're going to go ahead and break right at 12 noon. If we have to continue the discussion after 12, we will do so. So with that, Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We're going to give this a try from up here at the podium, and if it starts to, you get the feedback, then we'll step down to the staff table. Well, good morning. Jeff Doyle with D'Artagnan. This is our first formal introduction or discussion of privacy, at least as a specific agenda item for the TAC. As you know, privacy has been discussed at each of the meetings. It will be discussed formally at the next meeting in, trying to think of where we're going to be at, Sacramento. We'll look at data security and then again throughout the project, but this is our introduction to privacy. And there we go. Okay. Very briefly, the goals here really are to provide just an overview or a supplement to what you've hopefully already read in the briefing books on some of the legal foundations for privacy protections, specifically in California. And towards the end of the presentation, but more importantly this afternoon, you will have a discussion and be presented with 4 potential approaches to how you might want to bolster what is already in California law for the protection of privacy in the road charge program. Also, I should point out that we do have more information in the briefing books and in the presentation today, or at least in the next 30 minutes. There are some redirects, so if you have your briefing books available and you want to see more detail, by all means, a page ahead there. First and foremost, we learned this when we did a dry run of this presentation. We want to point out and remind the TAC, but also those in the audience and those watching, that this committee has already taken very important actions to protect privacy that are not contained in, for example, New Zealand, in the German truck system, in Oregon, and that is that you have chosen to allow the option of paying for time instead of miles so far in your operational concepts. And you've also allowed for choice in how mileage information would be collected, and those two together really form the basis of the strongest privacy protections that you can have. And so, unlike other situations where sometimes privacy is a bit of an afterthought, it's a software patch, it's something that's done because someone is either compelled to do it by litigation or through legislative negotiations. Here you've incorporated privacy by design principles where it's built into the operating system from the very get-go, from this design feature. Having said that, we are going to be discussing each of those circles or nodes around the system in a little bit more detail today so that you can be thinking about if you chose a certain operational concept, what would the privacy implications of that be? Very quickly, I know we're short on time, the 1077 requirements. The requirements are on top. Considerations are lower in the slide, but the ones that I would draw your attention to mostly are PII, that's personally identifiable information. I'll describe what that is in a moment. The direction, the requirement is to only collect what is absolutely needed for purposes of road charging. Okay, so that's the directive for the road charging purposes. A second thing I would like to highlight is that the TAC has been asked to recommend not only technical design requirements or safeguards rather, but also legal safeguards to protect PII. And that will come into play a little bit later this afternoon when you consider what methods you might want to use to provide those legal protections. Again, looking at this, what would you call it, a circle of privacy issues, we're only going to be dealing with the ones on the right that are highlighted in red. There are 4 principal questions or issues that you would want to consider. What is the minimum amount of PII that has to be collected? How is the information collected? That's the methods that are used. How is the information transmitted or shared with whoever is doing the account management? And finally, how is it used by the person who's holding that information? Now, privacy has more implications than that, but what we've tried to do, because it's such a large topic, is next month you will discuss in more detail and have a presentation on the data security aspects of privacy. And those are grayed out in this circle here who has access to it, how it's stored, how it's retained, how it's destroyed. Those will be deeper discussions for next month. In terms of definitions of privacy, there is no, as you've probably discovered, clear legal definition of what constitutes privacy. It tends to be, as a concept anyway, very highly subjective. It's also highly contextual. So if my kids and I are at a baseball game and they're waving at the camera, they want to see if they're on TV, they're not concerned about privacy, or we aren't. But if we're in our backyard and someone is across the street pointing a camera at us, in that context we are concerned about privacy. So that's why it's difficult to nail down a working definition of privacy that isn't subjective or contextual. There is a difference, though, between the legal definitions and then how we think about it and how society thinks about it and what their expectations are. So what we've tried to do is find a definition. We didn't create it. This was offered by someone from Yale. They describe personal privacy as the condition of being protected from unwanted access, whether it's physical, and that would most typically be the collection methods, how people or even government is collecting information. Personal information, what it is that they're collecting and what they know about you and what they're doing with it, or even attention, which would be like creepy behavior. I mean, it'd be like robocalls. It's unwanted. There's nothing. They're not gaining new information about you, but they're pestering you. We don't have that instance that we have envisioned yet with the road charge system, the attention privacy aspects, but we leave it up here just because these are three different facets. When people talk about privacy, it depends on specifically what you're trying to protect. PII, personally identifiable information, there is actually accepted industry definitions of what this is. Also, I should point out that in California, you have a statute, the Online Privacy Protection Act, I believe, in 2003 that defines what they consider, what the law considers PII. This is the type of information that enables someone to find you or to know who you are or to know about you, even if a nugget of information is not enough by itself when it's linked with other sources, say driver's databases. A license plate number, for example, that is not considered PII. At least the courts don't consider it PII. They say there's no privacy protection or privacy expectation for a random plate number. But on the other hand, when you link that with a database, now that becomes PII. And so this will become important because this is this is paramount in terms of the type of information that we really want to focus in on and protect in a road charge system.
Godwin's got a question.
More of a comment. I would think that traditionally for smartphones and other devices, we've thought of device identifiers as being PII just because of the fact that you often carry your phone with you wherever you go, and it transmits data to it, through the carrier and to the Wi-Fi network. I think in this context also any sort of automotive identifier, if there ends up being a system in which the car is phoning home, whatever device identifier is used for the automotive, for the auto, I think in our deliberations we should be considering that PII just because of the sensitivity of the information, the fact that usually the primary driver of the car is the one driving the car, and that location information could potentially be transmitted back to a central database or repository.
Good point. And in the briefing book, I think, Jeff, you did a good job identifying a lot of those things, Gautam, that you're pointing out, so that we have to be sensitive to that.
Particularly with devices.
Yeah, just one other point I'd want to add there is, in the materials right now they currently say locate a single person, and one of the things that I think that we've also really learned in the privacy world is that the narrowing, even if you don't actually get it down to one person, a lot of times what's important is you get it down to 100 people or to 10 people, because then it's not very hard to use other means to figure out, where somebody is. And we've had a lot of problems in the law with this because companies will make all sorts of absurd arguments about whether or not a given thing is PII. We've heard arguments that no residential landline phone number should be considered PII because there's no guarantee that it identifies a specific individual. If there are 4 people at home, that landline phone number doesn't resolve to that particular individual. And virtually all privacy advocates say that's a stupid, absurd, silly thing to do. And so I just want to emphasize that we should never think about it in terms of narrowing down to one. Narrowing down to a small group is more than enough. And sometimes it could be if I'm the only Chinese kid in a school, identifying that, saying, oh yeah, this person is Chinese, is going to be effectively in a context, specifically identifying me, even if in any other context it would not.
Okay, thank you. At a snapshot, this of course is not, I don't know of any way to represent it completely, accurately, proportionally, but this is a concept for showing that at least in law, both federal law and California law, you have layers of protections. And at the root of it is the U.S. constitutional protection for privacy, which we'll talk about in a moment. It's fundamental, but it's also actually, as it turns out, quite limited in terms of what society's privacy expectations and needs are versus what you can actually accomplish or has been accomplished through court cases interpreting privacy protections in the Constitution. California, it obviously has some of the same limitations in that it's constitutional. It's not going to likely to expand or change to meet the changing needs of society, but California's constitutional provisions are actually some of the strongest in terms of state constitutions, and they go further than the U.S. or federal Constitution. The next rung out, yes, please.
Can I add a point on the California Constitution? Again, one of the main reasons, the ways in which it's broader than the federal, is that California, Article 1, Section 1, doesn't have a state action requirement, right? This was an amendment to the state constitution in 1970-something, interpreted by the state Supreme Court in White versus Davis, based on the ballot argument. And the ballot argument very clearly talks about the threat from both government and business with regard to the collection of data. So unlike, say, the federal Fourth Amendment, which only goes to the actions of actual governmental agencies, in California, you can use the state constitutional privacy right against any against private companies or even individuals.
Oh, thank you for that. I didn't realize that. I thought that constitutional provisions were only covering government actions. There are still federal statutes and state statutes that expand the privacy protections for citizens and residents, and also at times have causes, or rather remedies in the statutes, or at least they can, if you are a company or the government and you're not observing the privacy protections in statute. Where we are in terms of a road charge system is we really are probably in the gray area, in the sense that I'll say people, this committee I think as well, have expectations about what they believe should be protected and private and kept confidential versus what is currently covered under the statutory regime in California. And so that's why Senate Bill 1077, for example, is actually quite explicit in saying, you must only collect minimal PII, it shall not be shared, and it cannot be, at least without consent, and you can't collect locational information without consent, at least exact locational information. So as you'll see in a moment here, there's some more detail on that, but we think that with actions that the TAC could take, you could actually expand a little bit into the gray area in terms of offering protections to motorists that participate in the pilot project.
Jeff, before you move on, in terms of that gray area, and I'm speaking as somebody who is not versed in privacy the way Lee and Gautam are, but this word expectations, I am a lawyer, and I know that comes from the Fourth Amendment jurisprudence in terms of reasonable expectations of privacy. For me, as a non-privacy expert and as a non-tech expert, I feel like that may not cover what I'm concerned about, because I don't necessarily know enough about the ins and outs of the technology to know what my expectations are. My expectations are more at the level of outcomes, and if something is sort of hidden in the software and I don't know about it, I don't have an expectation about that, but I do want to feel assured that the people who understand that stuff are making sure that the outcome fits those reasonable expectations. So I don't know if that would require a broadening of that phrase, but just a footnote to that at least. I want to make sure that the people who know about that stuff are taking that into account when they're protecting the rest of us.
Thank you. Yes, good point. Yeah. Let's see how this works. Okay, I should probably also say that, unlike what you've heard over the last few months where it's a lot of the project team talking to you about technical details and operational concepts and systems that are in other places where we probably have a slight knowledge advantage in those topics than the TAC. Here we have some of the top privacy experts, certainly in the state, if not the nation. And so we encourage you to jump in at any time and help us along and really bolster the process as we start talking about privacy, not only today but throughout. Again, I think we'll pick up the pace here. You've all read it, and we just discussed some of this. Is the privacy protections in the U.S. Constitution. It's not actually called out in the Constitution. This comes about by jurisprudence and cases that have come before the court where they interpret the Bill of Rights in certain amendments to the Constitution. And at least at the federal level, that only really covers governmental intrusions into privacy. It doesn't cover commercial invasions of your privacy from businesses, although apparently in California's Constitution does. Moving on, oops, sorry, I'm getting a little too fast here. Okay, California Constitution, we just discussed this, and the privacy protection is explicit in the California Constitution, and so that you do have more protections there. Okay. Now, we're ending the mini session here, at least on the legal framework for examining privacy. We want to point out that the right to privacy is not absolute and that there are trade-offs and that courts, Congress, legislators, citizens that vote, they're constantly making these trade-offs. Some of them are policy-based. So if you have a statute, for example, that is governing, how far can Google go in collecting your information, that's usually at a legislative level where those trade-offs are made. But some of them are constitutional, and there are some things that companies or perhaps even government does, such as collect taxes, that might offend some people, and maybe even the methods offend some people or many people. But in these instances, there are trade-offs that are made, and so the right to privacy is not absolute. Okay, now, how are we doing on time? I don't want to... 10 minutes, okay, all right. What we're going to talk about next is that, let me back up a slide so you can see it. There are 3 laws and 1 proposed law in California that we think, at least we've identified, that are relevant to the consideration of transportation, especially tax collection or revenue collection, technology, and privacy. And we think that there are some interesting points that can be extracted from this if the TAC wishes to bring some of those lessons forward into actions that you might take as a committee, either at the end of today or even at the end of this process. So we would like to touch on, or I would like to touch on the 4 areas that we found where we see this intersection. The first has to do with automotive event data recorders, or black boxes. These are devices that the automakers originally put in vehicles to collect feedback on, I think originally it was how well the airbag system was working. And most people didn't know that these devices were in the vehicles. They remained in the vehicles because they proved useful for diagnostic purposes for the automakers and how their cars were performing. Once drivers became aware that this information was being shared with automakers and that there perhaps weren't, or at least there was a feeling there weren't sufficient controls around the data, legislation in California was the first in the nation. It was landmark legislation, and it requires the automakers now to disclose the presence of the box itself, but also any data that's shared has to be shared only with the owner's consent, or at least knowledge. So if I have the data, then I can share it. And the automakers still retain some rights to that same data, and there are some exceptions. They're all based in safety and public policy and research. One of the other requirements is that the data is anonymized at some level, so that it cannot be tied back to an individual driver, and that's shared for research purposes to understand more about vehicle safety and sometimes even roadway safety. Another recent law, actually in 2013 in California, is a law that governs electronic toll collection systems. And this law requires or prevents PII, or personally identifying information, from being shared or sold by agencies. And by agencies, we're talking about toll authorities here. It's actually more robust of a law than I have on the 3 bullet points here, but we think that it's a good marker for the TAC to consider, because it did involve toll or money transactions for using the roadway network. And in the case of toll systems, you are providing a specific point in time and a specific location in which you are being recorded in a system. And so the ETC system law takes that into account, and it also requires that the drivers be made aware in a very conspicuous way of the types of data that's being collected and the manner in which it's being collected. And more importantly, or as importantly, is the data security requirements, which we're going to talk about in detail next month, but it has to do with, okay, how long is that information being retained, how's it being used, and when can it be destroyed, or how is it being destroyed? So we're going to get into that more next month, but we think that this might be a law that's ripe for some things to pull forward if the TAC so chooses. The next one is automated license plate recognition systems, ALPRs or LPRs. And courts have held, at least so far, that there is no reasonable privacy expectation in a license plate number by itself. So to this point, that has enabled many law enforcement agencies, not just in California, but around the nation, to set up ALPR systems. They are basically high-powered cameras that can take a snapshot of a vehicle license plate, and using optical character recognition, they can obviously read what the license plate is. And then the question is, well, what happens with that data, and what are you using it for? And so right now, because there is not a law in California, there are in some other states, Maine and New Hampshire have recently enacted laws, but in California there is no law that regulates at least this specific type of information collection activity. There are other laws that would apply. In particular, the 1977 Information Practices Act, but that's more generally applied, and that requires government agencies to, be authorized to actually collect that information, and for it to be necessary for whatever that agency's mission is for their purpose. So they can't collect it for general information and use it for purposes which weren't authorized in law. But generally speaking, California does not on the books have a law right now. I do want to point out that there is pending legislation. It's Senate Bill 34. I believe, I'm not sure what the latest status of it is, but I thought it had passed both houses and has not yet been enacted, but there may be some valuable information in there that the TAC can consider as we move forward. Finally, location-based services, and ALPR is one aspect of a location-based service, but really what we're talking about here are GPS systems, Wi-Fi, cell tower triangulation. Traffic cameras are the same, considered location-based, as are the license plate recognition systems. Again, there's not anything currently in California law that specifically addresses this. Senate Bill 34 may touch on some of this, but right now the most robust law that you have is actually the direction in this pilot project in Senate Bill 1077 that restricts the use of locational information and how that information can be used. The limitation on that is that's just directive for how to design a pilot project. That doesn't, unless the legislature does something next with it, it doesn't last beyond the pilot project and doesn't have any bearing in law after that. Please.
So I wanted to make a quick general point about location privacy, and the reason why, one of the reasons why 1077
has good protections for it is because it's a very new piece of legislation, right? And the reason why location privacy has become much more of an issue is because in 2012, the Supreme Court actually recognized that you could, essentially, 5 justices of the Supreme Court recognized that you can have a reasonable expectation of privacy in your location, even though it was in public, right? For many, many years, people just sort of said, oh, you're in public. There's no possibility that it can be private based on some old Supreme Court cases. But now 5 justices of the Supreme Court realize that when you aggregate, when you track people in the world, that's actually a big privacy issue, and that the cops, and so the movement, at least from a Fourth Amendment perspective, is very much towards requiring a warrant based on probable cause to obtain, to get location information, whether to track it or to get it from, the phone company because of these things for government purposes. So that's a state action thing. And what we are expecting as privacy advocates is that that's going to continue to influence, continue to sort of spread throughout the law. And here in California, our position's always been, well, the California state constitution is stricter, period, end of story. And if the federal Fourth Amendment was willing to say that there is a reasonable expectation of privacy in public for one's detailed location, then surely California should be. So, I think there's a trend in that direction, and we're seeing we see many bills that touch on this. The ALPR bill is just one example, right? There are geolocation bills all over the place as well. So, currently the law is not where exactly it should be, but it's definitely trending and almost monotonically.
Jeff, how many more minutes do you want, or do we want to go ahead and break for lunch? And
there's a natural break point just with one more slide,
okay.
and then we can come back and talk about what you want to do about all this privacy.
Perfect.
Okay. In fact, maybe we just should break here, because what we're going to talk about next is going through the operational concepts. In fact, we'll just preview it for you, and we can do it after lunch. We'll look at the operational concepts. And in fact, if you remember back to the last TAC meeting, you had asked to see some sort of mock-up or snapshot of how do we look at these operational concepts and understand what the privacy implications are. We talked about a ranking system, but it didn't turn out as a ranking system. But we think that what we have developed for you will be useful, and that will kick off probably the second half of the conversation on privacy after lunch.
Okay. So without objection from anybody, we're all right to break for lunch. What should we allow for time based on schedule? You want to say 45 minutes? Is that good? Consensus? All right. Let's reconvene at 12:50 on the dot. Thank you.